The Chicago morning mist clung to Ayana's windows like a veil of secrets, but she was already awake, already moving. At 5:15, when the city still whispered instead of shouted, she stood in her narrow kitchen, hands working with practiced precision. 2 foil squares caught the weak kitchen light, sandwiches wrapped with the kind of care usually reserved for precious things. She pressed each corner tight, smoothing the silver edges until they gleamed like promises. From the refrigerator, she retrieved a bruised apple, not spoiled, just kissed by time, and tucked it into her worn backpack next to the foil packets. The bag had been hers for 3 years, its faded purple fabric bearing the weight of more than just books. Her reflection caught in the toaster's curved surface, 15 years old, skin deep as Chicago evenings, hair a crown of natural curls that refused to be tamed, despite the foster home's insistence on presentable. She moved through her routine like a dancer who'd forgotten her audience had left long ago. The stairs creaked their familiar complaint as she descended, and she paused at the door, fingers tracing the locks that kept her world small and safe. Beyond that door waited another day of whispers, another day of being the shadow that fed shadows. Jefferson High School squatted on Roosevelt Road like a gray-bearded giant, its windows watching thousands of young souls hurry past. Ayana entered through the side doors, avoiding the main entrance where Destiny Richardson held court, with her perfect pressing and her perfect crowd. Here, where lockers slammed shut like prison doors, Ayana was just another ghost. "There goes the lunch lady," snickered Marcus Thompson, loud enough for everyone to hear. "Double bagging it again, Ayana." Her name twisted in his mouth like a bitter pill. The group erupted in rehearsed laughter, a sound that echoed through the hallway like rain on aluminum. Mrs. Henderson, her first period teacher, noticed the extra lunch, but said nothing. Teachers in schools like Jefferson had learned to pick their battles, and Ayana's quiet suffering wasn't pressing enough to warrant intervention. She was polite, passed her tests, and never caused trouble, a model student by most measures, invisible by all others. At lunch, while others shared stories and phone screens, Ayana sat in her usual corner, her second sandwich still wrapped, and waiting. The cafeteria buzzed with teenage energy, but none of it touched her. She existed in a pocket of silence, counting minutes until she could fulfill her real purpose. 2 blocks east of Jefferson, where Chinatown began its colorful sprawl, an alley stretched between Lee's Golden Dragon restaurant and a laundromat that had seen better decades. Here, behind a green dumpster that leaked rust-colored tears, lived a secret that Ayana carried like a second heartbeat. Moses looked up as her shadow fell across his makeshift shelter. His dreadlocks, silver-streaked and pulled back with a rubber band, framed a face that had once been handsome. Now 7 months after their first wordless exchange, he was her responsibility, her purpose, her proof that she mattered to someone in this vast city. "Morning, Miss A," he said, his voice carrying the rasp of Chicago winters and untold stories. His hand, scarred but gentle, reached for the sandwich she offered. "Don't know what you put in these, but they taste like hope." Ayana settled beside him on an overturned crate, pulling her knees to her chest. "You always say that." "Because it's true. You remind me of someone." He paused, eyes focusing on something she couldn't see. "A long time ago." She never pressed him for details. In 7 months, she'd learned that Moses existed in a world of fragments, pieces of memory that surfaced like bubbles in deep water. Sometimes he spoke of engineering, sometimes of flying, sometimes of a woman whose laugh could fill a room. But mostly he just ate her sandwiches and looked grateful to be remembered. February arrived like an unwelcome relative, overstaying its welcome and making everyone miserable. The alley became a canyon of wind, and Moses's cough grew deeper, more frequent. Ayana found him one morning hunched over, his breath visible in painful puffs. "You need a doctor," she insisted, panic rising in her chest like floodwater. "Doctors ask questions, Miss A. They want names, addresses, insurance cards." His eyes held a fear that went beyond physical pain. "And I lost my name somewhere in these streets, lost everything that mattered." That night, lying on her narrow bed in the foster home, Ayana stared at water stains on the ceiling that looked like clouds. The foster parents, Maria and Carl, were good people who did their job without cruelty, but without warmth either. She was a placement, not a daughter. Moses was more family to her than anyone who'd shared her legal name. Something in his words nagged at her. The careful way he said, "lost my name," the flicker of recognition when he looked at her. She'd always been good with puzzles, with seeing patterns others missed. This one felt important. But as she lay, there listening to Maria's television shows bleeding through thin walls, she couldn't imagine how to solve a puzzle made of a man's broken memories and Chicago's indifferent streets. All she could do was return tomorrow with another sandwich, another bruised apple, another proof that someone in this world cared whether he lived or died. Would Moses survive the winter, or would her sandwiches become makeshift headstones for a man the world had already forgotten? The Harold Washington Library Center stood like a temple to knowledge at 400 South State Street, its red brick facade promising answers to those patient enough to seek them. Ayanna had discovered the computers on the third floor months ago. Old, machines that wheezed but functioned, supervised by a librarian who'd long stopped monitoring teenage research habits. She slid into chair 12, the same one every time, and pulled out a USB drive she'd bought with lunch money. Her fingers moved across the keyboard with surprising fluency, a skill she'd taught herself from discarded programming books she'd found in Jefferson's dumpster. Code was a language that made sense to her, with rules that didn't change based on who you were or what you looked like. The missing persons database required creative entry, bypassing security she probably shouldn't have been able to bypass. But desperation made excellent teachers, and she was a quick study in digital rebellion. She typed in every detail she remembered about Moses. Age approximately 60, African-American, multiple scars on left forearm, distinctive laugh when happy, references to flying and engineering. Page after page of faces flashed by. Chicago's forgotten, it's lost, it's deliberately hidden. She was ready to give up when a photo stopped her cold. Younger, cleaner, but unmistakably the same eyes that looked at her with gratitude every morning. Elijah Moses Caldwell, former aerospace engineer, decorated Navy veteran, reported missing 8 years ago after the death of his wife. Presumed dead by family, service records classified. The screen blurred as tears she hadn't expected filled her eyes. Moses, Elijah, wasn't just another discarded man. He was someone whose absence had left a hole in other lives, someone's father, someone's husband, someone worth searching for. 2 days passed before Ayanna worked up the courage to return to the alley. She found Moses worse than ever, skin grey, cough wet and harsh. He tried to smile when he saw her, but the effort cost him. "You're not just anyone," she said softly, kneeling beside him. "Your name is Elijah Caldwell. You have people who miss you." His eyes widened, then filled with something that might have been relief or terror. "People who gave up long ago, Miss A. People who buried an empty box and moved on. But they didn't find you. I did." She pulled out her phone, a cracked screen barely hanging on, but it worked. "Can you say something? Just hello to your family." He was quiet so long she thought he'd refuse. Then, in a voice barely above a whisper, "My name is Elijah Caldwell. I served my country and loved my wife. I forgot how to be a person after she died. But this young lady, this angel, she's been feeding me, caring for me. Her name is Ayanna, and she's shown me how to be human again." That evening, alone in her room, Ayanna typed an anonymous email to the contact listed in Elijah's military records. She attached the video and held her breath before hitting send. Maybe nothing would happen. Maybe it wasn't enough, but it was all she had. Little did she know that in a suburb north of Chicago, a phone would ring in the middle of the night, waking a helicopter pilot who'd spent 8 years believing his father was dead. Would a single video message be enough to reunite a lost father with the family who'd given up searching for him? 3 days later, during Mrs. Chen's third-period biology class, the world changed. It started as a distant thrumming, like thunder without clouds. Students fidgeted, looking at each other and then at the windows. The sound grew louder, more insistent, until books trembled on desks. "Helicopter!" someone shouted, and the room erupted in movement. Outside, a sleek aircraft descended onto Jefferson's football field, its rotors kicking up dust and scattered papers. Students pressed against windows, phones appearing like fireflies as everyone tried to capture the moment. Teachers shouted, "For order," but even they craned their necks to see. Ayana remained seated, her heart hammering. This wasn't coincidence. She felt it in her bones, in the way the universe seemed to pivot around her like a compass finding true north. A figure emerged from the helicopter, tall, authoritative, wearing a pilot's uniform that caught the March sunlight. Behind him, two others in dark suits followed, but it was the pilot who commanded attention, his stride purposeful as he entered the school through the main doors that Ayana had always avoided. The classroom door burst open. Principal Martinez entered. First, his face a mask of confusion and protocol. Behind him came the pilot, whose eyes scanned the room like a searchlight until they found her. "That's her," he said, voice carrying California confidence tinged with something deeper. "Ayana." The room fell silent, except for the whisper of 30 teenagers holding their breath. The pilot stepped forward and, to everyone's shock, knelt on one knee before her desk. "My name is Captain Caleb Caldwell," he said, his voice breaking slightly. "You found my father." Ayana's vision blurred. The sandwich, the email, the man who might have been her own father for all the love she'd shown him. The room spun, and she gripped her desk to keep from falling. "Ma'am," one of the suited men said to Mrs. Chen, "we need to speak with this young lady. It's a family matter." The principal's office had never hosted anything like this. Captain Caleb Caldwell sat across from Ayana, still wearing his flight suit, his eyes red with unshed tears. The men in suits were silent witnesses to a reunion 8 years in the making. "Tell me everything," Caleb said. "Please." Ayana's voice came out in halting whispers at first, then stronger as the story unfolded. The morning sandwiches, the 7 months of feeding a man she knew only as Moses, the library research, the video message sent into the digital void, hoping it would reach someone who still cared. He spoke about flying sometimes, she said, about engineering and a woman who made him laugh. Caleb's control cracked. "My mother. She died from cancer 8 years ago. Dad, he blamed himself somehow, said he should have caught it sooner, should have done more. One day we woke up and he was gone. Left a note saying he was already dead inside, that we'd be better off grieving him properly and moving on." He pulled out his phone, scrolling to photos. This is him before. Ayana saw Moses Elijah, in a Navy uniform, standing beside a woman with kind eyes and a bright smile. Another photo showed him in a suit, accepting an award for aerospace engineering. The final image was a family portrait. Caleb as a young man, Elijah and his wife, and a daughter Ayana hadn't expected. "My sister Zara's in medical school now," Caleb explained. "She became a doctor because of what happened to Mum. And I learned to fly because Dad used to take me to air shows. We both became what he was too broken to be." Ayana felt tears on her cheeks. "He's sick. The winter was hard on him. We're taking him to Northwestern Hospital," Caleb said. "The best doctors. The best care. But first..." He reached into his jacket and pulled out a phone. He asked to speak with you. The screen showed Moses Elijah, cleaned up in a hospital gown, looking more like the man in the old photos. When he saw her face, he smiled. "My Miss A," he said, his voice clearer than she'd heard it. "You saved me, brought me back to life when I thought I was already dead. Have you ever been the one person who saw someone when the rest of the world looked away? Share your story in the comments below." Northwestern Memorial Hospital was a tower of glass and steel reaching toward the Chicago sky, filled with antiseptic smells and the quiet urgency of healing. Ayana walked its corridors feeling like Alice tumbling down a rabbit hole, everything familiar and foreign at once. Elijah's room was on the 16th floor, with windows that made the city look like a miniature model. He seemed smaller in the hospital bed, but his eyes were clearer than they'd been in months. Beside him sat a young woman with her father's eyes and her mother's gentle smile. "This is Zara, my daughter," Elijah said, reaching for Ayana's hand. "The doctor I told you about." Zara stood and embraced Ayana like they were old friends. "He talks about you constantly. How you fed him, talked to him, treated him like a human being when the rest of the world pretended he was invisible." "I have a confession," Elijah said, his voice stronger now. I knew who you were before you knew who I was. Ayana frowned. What do you mean? Your name tag. That first day you gave me a sandwich. You were wearing a school ID that said A. Johnson. I asked around, learned you were in foster care. It broke my heart. This young girl, carrying so much kindness in a world that hadn't shown her much. He paused, eyes glistening. I used to think I was being punished for not saving my wife for all the ways I failed. But then you appeared, this angel in second-hand clothes, and I realized maybe I wasn't being punished. Maybe I was being prepared to understand what it meant to be lost, so I could recognize you when you needed finding. Caleb cleared his throat. That's actually something we wanted to discuss. The Caldwell family conference room at Caleb's apartment was nothing like the foster home. Floor-to-ceiling windows revealed Lake Michigan stretching to the horizon, and the furniture looked like it had been chosen for comfort, not durability. Ayana sat on a sofa that probably cost more than a year of her foster parents' stipend. We've talked to your caseworker, Zara began, and to Maria and Carl. Ayana's stomach dropped. Am I in trouble? No, sweetheart, Caleb said quickly. The opposite, actually. Elijah, who was feeling well enough to be discharged in a few days, leaned forward. We want to ask you something big. He pulled out an envelope with the Northwestern Academy logo, a school Ayana knew by reputation, but had never dared dream of attending. Full scholarship, computer science program, the best in the state. Her hands shook as she opened it. The letter was real, formal, bearing signatures that promised a future she'd never imagined. How? Caleb called in some favors, Zara explained. The military has connections, and when they heard what you did, using programming skills, you taught yourself to find a missing veteran. Well, people wanted to help. But Elijah held up his hand. There's more. He stood, still unsteady but determined, and got down on one knee. Ayana Johnson, you gave me back my family, my life, my will to keep breathing. Now we want to give you something in return. Would you let us be your family? Officially? Caleb nodded. Maria and Carl have agreed to the transfer. We've started the adoption process, if you'll have us. The room went quiet, except for the sound of Ayana crying. Happy tears this time, the kind that washed away years of wondering if anyone would ever choose her. But would a girl who'd spent her life in the shadows be able to step into the light of being truly wanted? The news traveled through Jefferson High like wildfire, fed by teenage gossip and social media. Ayana Johnson, the girl they'd called the ghost, the one they'd mocked for her double lunches, had become the girl who found the millionaire's lost father, the girl who was about to become a Caldwell. But the transformation wasn't about money or status, it was about being seen. On her last day at Jefferson, before transferring to Northwestern Academy, something had changed in how people looked at her. The whispers were different now, awed instead of mocking. Destiny Richardson, who'd never spoken to her before, approached after fifth period. I heard what you did, she said, her usual arrogance replaced by something like respect. Taking care of that homeless guy, that was really good of you. He has a name, Ayana replied quietly. Elijah. And he was never just homeless, he was lost. In the cafeteria where she'd eaten alone for 3 years, students nodded as she passed. Not friendship exactly, but acknowledgement. She was no longer invisible. The girl who'd fed sandwiches to a forgotten man had reminded an entire school that everyone had a story worth knowing. Mrs. Henderson stopped her after class. I should have seen it sooner. What you were doing, who you were. I'm sorry. Ayana smiled. You couldn't have known. I didn't want to be seen then, but now she was ready to be known, to take up space, to matter. The foster home had been Ayana's address for 4 years, but it had never been home. As she packed her few belongings into new luggage, another gift from the Caldwells, Maria and Carl stood in the doorway. You're a good kid, Ayana, Carl said gruffly. Don't forget where you came from. Maria hugged her, and for the first time Ayana felt genuine warmth from the woman who'd sheltered her without truly loving her. You deserved better than we could give you, but you made something beautiful anyway. the drive to the Caldwell. Home took 20 minutes, but felt like traveling to another planet. The neighborhood was different. Tree-lined streets, houses with actual yards, mailboxes that weren't battered by years of urban wear. The house was a red brick colonial that managed to look stately without being intimidating. As they pulled into the driveway, Elijah opened the front door. He was wearing khakis and a button-down shirt, looking like the engineer he'd been before the streets claimed him. "Welcome home, daughter," he said simply. Inside, Zara had prepared a room on the second floor. Not a spare room or a guest room, but her room. The walls were painted a soft purple, and there was a desk by the window, a bookshelf already filled with programming guides and novels, and a bed with more pillows than one person could reasonably need. "I didn't know what you liked," Zara said nervously. "But Caleb said you were interested in computers, and I thought maybe—" "It's perfect," Ayanna whispered, running her hand along the desk's smooth surface. "It's more than perfect." That evening they had dinner together at a table that seated 6 but felt intimate. Elijah had cooked. "One of the few skills I retained during my lost years," he joked. The conversation flowed like they'd been family, for years instead of months. As Ayanna sat there, surrounded by people who'd chosen her, she thought of Moses in his alley and marveled at the distance traveled. Sometimes the journey from lost to found was measured not in miles, but in moments of recognition. Someone seeing you, someone caring, someone refusing to let you disappear. 6 months later, on a crisp October day, Ayanna stood in the same alley behind Lee's Golden Dragon, but this time she wasn't alone. The Caldwell family was with her, along with a city work crew and a man with a clipboard who kept pointing at various spots and scribbling notes. The alley was being transformed, not erased. That would have been too easy, too much like forgetting. Instead, it was becoming something beautiful. A pocket park with benches and a small plaque that would read, "In recognition of those who serve others without seeking recognition themselves." Elijah stood beside the dumpster, where Ayanna had found him, his hand resting on the green metal like an old friend. "Hard to believe that thing saved my life," he said. "You saved your own life," Ayanna corrected. "You chose to keep living, even when living hurt." Caleb and Zara were working with the city to establish a program, emergency services for veterans experiencing homelessness, with a specific focus on those with PTSD who'd gone missing from their support systems. It would be called the Elijah Project. "We can't be the only family this happens to," Zara explained to a reporter who'd come to cover the story. "And she can't be the only teenager who sees what adults choose to ignore." At Northwestern Academy, Ayanna's programming skills had blossomed under expert guidance. She was working on an app that would help connect missing persons with their families using facial recognition and missing persons databases. The same technology that had helped her find Elijah would help others find their way home. But the real success wasn't in the technology or the accolades. It was in the moment when a homeless veteran would approach Elijah on the street. Word had gotten around about who he'd been and where he was now, and he'd stop, really see them and say, "Let me buy you lunch, and then let's talk." 1. Year after the helicopter landed at Jefferson High, Ayanna woke up in her room in the Caldwell house. Sunlight streamed through windows she could open freely, carrying the sound of birds instead of sirens. But old habits died hard. At 5:15 a.m. she was still awake, still moving with purpose. In the kitchen, she prepared a single sandwich, a good one with meat and cheese that didn't come from the discount rack, not because she had to, but because she wanted to. Down the street, there was an elderly woman who sometimes missed meals when her social security didn't stretch far enough. It was a small kindness, one among many that Ayanna scattered through her days like seeds. Elijah found her there, looking out the window at the morning. "Old habits?" he asked, joining her with his own cup of coffee. "Good habits," she corrected. "The world still has people who need to be seen." He smiled. "Your mother would have liked you. She used to say that angels don't always have wings. Sometimes they just have sandwiches and the heart to share them." At Northwestern Academy, Ayanna had become something of a legend, not because of the dramatic rescue or the family reunion, but because she embodied something the other students were just learning: That true success wasn't about being the smartest or the richest, but about noticing who needed help and having the courage to provide it. Her app had launched and was connecting missing persons with their families at a rate that amazed crisis counselors. But more importantly, she'd started a volunteer program at the academy. Every week, students would go out into Chicago with extra meals, water bottles, and phone cards. They called themselves Sandwich Angels, though Ayanna always rolled her eyes at the name. It's not about being angelic, she'd tell new volunteers. It's about being human, about remembering that dignity isn't something you earn, it's something you're born with. The alley behind Lee's Golden Dragon had been transformed into a small memorial garden, but Ayanna still visited sometimes. Not with sandwiches now, but with flowers for the plaque that honored those who serve others without seeking recognition. As she prepared for another day, calculus, advanced programming, and a meeting about the new shelter the Elijah Project was opening, Ayanna caught her reflection in the toaster. Still the same dark skin, still the same proud curls. But the eyes were different. They held certainty now, a quiet knowledge that she belonged in the world, that her presence mattered, that her kindness wasn't charity but connection. At breakfast, the whole family gathered around the table that had once been too big and now felt just right. Caleb talked about a flight he'd taken to deliver supplies to a disaster zone. Zara shared news from the hospital where she was completing her residency in trauma surgery. Elijah discussed plans for a veterans workshop he was organizing. And Ayanna listened, part of the conversation now, part of the solution, part of a family that hadn't been born but chosen, by small acts of kindness that rippled outward like stones thrown into still water. "Ready for school?" Caleb asked, gathering his flight equipment. "Always," Ayanna replied, shouldering her backpack. It was new and sturdy, but she still kept one foil-wrapped sandwich in the side pocket, because the world was full of people who needed to be seen, and Ayanna, Caldwell, not Johnson anymore, but the name she'd chosen when love chose her back, had learned that visibility was a gift you could give others. The morning Chicago streets welcomed her with the promise of another day, another chance to notice what others overlooked, another opportunity to prove that kindness was never wasted. Sometimes heroes don't wear capes. Sometimes they wear hand-me-down jackets and carry extra sandwiches. Sometimes they're 15 years old and invisible to everyone, except the one person who needs most to be seen. And sometimes when you feed someone who's forgotten their own name, you end up finding a family that remembers yours. You are amazing. If you genuinely enjoyed this story, please leave a like and subscribe. It's a great feedback for me. If it made you feel seen, heard, or simply reminded you that change is still possible, share it with someone who needs a little hope today. See you.